welcome to the library. We thank you for coming and supporting the East Hampton Library and the Tom Twomey series. Would you please be so kind to turn off your cell phones? Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we are going to have a Q&A after the presentation, so please hold your questions. And now we would love for Howard and Andrew and Howard to step forward. And the guests of honor. This is really exciting for us. I thought long and hard about how I introduced these two distinguished guests. After looking over all of their accomplishments, I realized that cutting their list down would have to happen because we would never hear from them. So I recommend that you go to Wikipedia and you search under Andrew and Howard. And if you don't have a computer at home, please come to the library. We have many computers and you can use ours.
Very good. Good plug for the library. Very good, Kenny.
It pays to advertise. Okay, so Howard and Sherry met on Main Beach. And this is, people don't know this. And they got married in East Hampton, and they're wonderful kids. Jordan and Addie had their marriage and their weddings at their home in East Hampton, and we're very proud of them. And Andrew does have a relative in East Hampton. It's Janet Ross. And she is on the library board with me. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction. I don't know, Janet, where are you?
Right there.
Oh, hi, Janet. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here with Howard Schultz this evening, and we're going to have a conversation for the next hour, and we hope to make it interactive and bring everybody into the conversation. Howard Schultz is what I would describe as one of the great examples of the American dream. He is somebody who was born in Canarsie. Everyone knows Canarsie.
Love that. Go Brooklyn.
Started working at a little coffee store called Starbucks in Seattle, and today there are 29,000 Starbucks around the world. Just to put that in context, it's in 77 different countries. 3,500 of those stores are in China. There is one new store, more than one new store, being built every single day in China. It is a remarkable thing. And to put it even in more perspective, he was probably, I believe, the first executive ever to offer stock options and health care to all of its employees. Whether you're behind the, whether you're a barista or mopping up the floors or anything like that. And one of the things I always love about Howard is he always talked about creating a company. This is the quote: the company that my father never got to work for. That's what drove you. And it's something I've always thought it's an important way to do this. Having said all of that, he stepped down from this company, as you all know and read, in June. And when he stepped down, he said that he was going to pursue potentially a couple different things. Said he might maybe philanthropy. He was going to be writing a book, and he talked about the possibility of public service. And so
we happen to do that together on live television.
We happen to do that together on live television.
A lot of problems.
Which caused you a lot of problems. So we're going to create some more problems right now. And we should just get it out of the way. You said that you were going to, last time I talked to you, you said you were going to think about what you were going to be doing next. And maybe you might want to make some news for this crowd right now. What are you going to do next?
Well, there's obviously no news. When Andrew and I sat down, it was just a few days after I had stepped down from Starbucks, and we had a live interview on Squawk Box, and I was trying to be very transparent and open about my concern for the country, and what I feel is if we all have an individual and collective responsibility to recognize the time we're living in and do everything we can as citizens to try and make this country a little bit better than it is today. Having said that, I can do a lot of good things for America without running for president. And I have no, today, intention of doing anything other than exploring many possibilities. I am writing a book about the lessons I've learned at Starbucks, about the role and responsibility of a public company, and also trying to think about reimagining the possibilities of what America could be in the future. And I think, like all of us today, we're living at a very fragile time, and I think each one of us are asking ourselves very personal questions about the time we're living in, what we can do to advance the pursuit of democracy in America, and I'm trying to figure that out. And at this point, I don't know what that will mean.
Okay.
It's very warm in here. Really warm.
I want to get back to, we're going to spend some time on what you think is going on in this country. And you've been spending a lot of time traveling around the country and the world, and I want to get into that conversation. But I want to start at the beginning with Starbucks, especially for those uninitiated in this room. When you talked about this idea of wanting to create a company that your father never worked for, what did that mean?
Sure. Well, as we were talking before, I happened to be in Canarsie and in Brooklyn yesterday. And I was there because we were taking a photo shoot for the book. And I actually went back to the public housing project that I was born in and lived from 1956 to about 1970. My father was a blue-collar World War II veteran, and unfortunately came back to the United States with dengue fever. And his entire life was a series of very, very bad jobs, and really never got access to the American dream. And we watched as kids and as our family grew up, literally the fracturing of the promise of America. And what I've tried to do at Starbucks all these years is think about whether, regardless of your station in life, your ethnic background, your color of your skin, your sexual orientation, what can we do to create respect and dignity in the workforce? Because my father, unfortunately, did not get that kind of respect. And I saw that. He became very bitter about it. So the entire proposition of Starbucks over these years was to build a company that would achieve the fragile balance between profit and conscience. And as Andrew said, very early on, we lived in an apartment. My parents never owned anything. And so we gave equity in the form of stock options, comprehensive health insurance, because we did not have health insurance for a number of years before the Affordable Care Act. And then 2 years ago did something that no company in America had ever done before, and that is free college tuition for every single employee. And all I've tried to do is build the kind of great enduring company that people would be proud to work for, and our financial performance has not suffered as a result of those things, but actually it's been accretive to the company, to the brand, to the attrition rate, and I think we've proven something that's quite important, and that is success is best when it's shared.
I want to get into all of it, but I want to I want to even go back to the beginning of the idea, the Starbucks idea. I don't know if we've ever talked about this. Alan Patrikoff, who many people in this room may know and has a house out here, loves to tell a story about you. I don't know if you know this.
I don't know him.
You don't know Alan? You don't know that? Well, I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
He's a venture capitalist, and apparently in the early 80s, if you ask him, and by the way, he invested in Apple and Intel early, he always talks about his missed deals. He says, this guy came to me.
Oh. Well, there were so many people who turned me down, so it would be very easy not to know.
This guy came to me, and he said, look, I have this idea. I'm going to put Starbucks, I'm going to put coffee shops on the corners of all these, streets. And, he looks at you don't remember this, and he says, but there are already coffee shops on all the corners of the streets. What are you talking about?
Right.
So I just want to understand what you think you knew then that he didn't, and we all didn't either.
Well, as I said, it's not funny, but Alan Patrikoff was not alone. Hundreds of people, probably some of you to here today, turned me down. I didn't have any money. I had no resources. I had an idea. So that idea, the genesis for that was I took my first trip to Milan, to Italy in 1983. And I was walking the streets of Milan, and everywhere I walked, I was intercepted literally by another coffee bar, espresso bar. But what struck me was not only the quality of the coffee and the theater and the romance, but what really got me was the sense of community. That these coffee bars were a third place for everybody. And that third place did not exist in America, and coffee at the time in the early 80s was terrible in America. It was like swill, real bad. And so I rushed back to the United States and had this great idea. Had a lovely wife who was very supportive of what I was trying to do. We had no money, we had no resources, and we were in Seattle, Washington, and we had a dream, and that was to create a national brand. Now, I had to raise money to do that, and just a quick story is we had a business plan, and we said we're going to build 100 stores in 5 years, and everyone said no, it's not going to work. Italian names that no one could pronounce, you're going to charge $4 for coffee in a paper cup, you're going to give equity and health care to employees. No, we're not interested. And so I didn't even have enough money to reprint the business plan because everybody was turning me down. I just crossed out 100 and wrote 75. And eventually we raised the first $2 million to begin the idea. And we had some modest success at first, but it wasn't something that was an overnight success. But I could smell that we had a unique idea. Did I ever believe that a kid from the projects could one day be sitting in front of all of you, and as Andrew said, with stores all over the world and a company that has become an iconic brand? No, I couldn't. But I would say this not for applause, but because I mean it. It can only happen in America.
You have a famous neighbor in Seattle, known as Bill Gates. And I don't know how many people know this story, but his father actually played a huge role in the creation of Starbucks.
Yeah. So this is a story that was a secret for over 20 years. And I was talking to Andrew. I was supposed to speak at the Microsoft CEO Summit a couple of years ago, and I said, Andrew, you think I could tell this story? You know, Bill's right in the front row. You think I didn't have the courage to tell it because I thought maybe somebody would get upset with me. And Andrew said, no, go for it. He wasn't on stage with me. He didn't really. So I said, this is a story I told. This is exactly what happened. So I am not the original founder of Starbucks Coffee Company. I came to work for Starbucks when they had 6 stores in Seattle. And Starbucks bought a company called Pete's in California. They got into financial difficulty, and the founder said to me, we're going to sell Starbucks. You should buy it. That was great news. It was $4 million, but I didn't have a dime. We had no money. So he said, I'll give you 60 days to go raise $4 million, and I'm not talking to anybody else. And I started talking to everybody, and I started raising some money. And he came to me about 30 days in and said, how are you doing? And I said, I've got about half of it raised. I'm sure I'm going to raise the money. And he said, we got a problem. The problem is I have an unsolicited cash offer with no due diligence to buy the company. And I said, wait, how could that happen? And he said, one of your investors in your Italian coffee company heard about it and has come to me. And it turns out this guy was like one of the titans in Seattle at the time. I mean, a real superstar guy who controlled lots of power. And I was a minnow in Seattle. No one knew me. I had no resources. And anyway, I'm about to lose the entire opportunity. This guy's going to steal my dream. So I go to a friend of mine who's an attorney. I tell him the story, and he says, you've got to come to the office first thing in the morning and meet our senior partner. And I said, who is it? What's his name? And he said, Bill Gates. I never heard of Bill Gates. I mean, Bill Gates at that point there was no Bill Gates. He was Bill Gates. And so it turns out Bill Gates Sr., 6'7", and he was like the premier lawyer in town. I went and told him the story. I'm going to try and make this as quick as I can. And he asked me 2 questions. He said, is everything you're telling me the truth? And did you leave anything out? And I said, Mr. Gates, I've told you everything is the emis, 100% the truth. There's a home crowd. So Bill Gates Sr. says, come back in 2 hours. And I said to my friend, what's going to happen? He said, I don't know. So I go back in 2 hours, and Mr. Gates says, we're going to take a walk. And where are we going? And he said, we're going to go see the guy. My heart was like in my mouth. I mean, I'm palpitating. And we walk across the street. Bill Gates he's a big man. And we walk in unannounced. The guy is in his office. We go into the room. Bill Gates stands over the desk, and he says to the guy, there's no way this is going to happen. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're not going to steal this kid's idea. You're going to stand down. We're going to walk out of this office. He's going to buy the company, and we're never going to hear from him again. And I was just like, this must be how it works. So I walk out, and I'm kind of, to be honest with you, quite emotional. I wasn't crying, but I was close. And I said, what just happened? And he said, Howard, you're gonna buy the company, and my son and I are going to help you. So Bill is sitting in the front row at the Microsoft Summit. He says, I never heard that story. And then he said to me, who was it? And I whispered to him, and he said, and that was the first time I told the story, which was 2 years ago. And so if it wasn't for Bill Gates Sr., there would be no Starbucks, and you would not know who Howard Schultz is. And he never told anyone. He just did it.
Are you going to tell us the other person?
I can't do that.
Is he still alive?
No.
No. Let me ask you a different question about Starbucks itself. For those who follow Starbucks avidly, you might know that in the board of Starbucks, they reserve 2 seats, empty seats at every board meeting, that they leave empty throughout the meeting. What are the empty seats for? Not Elijah.
For the last 30 years, we have a Monday management team meeting, and we have a quarterly board meeting. And if you think about what Starbucks is, and the essence of it, we're really in the people business. We have 350,000 employees, and we call them partners. And what I've tried to ask myself constantly over these last 30 plus years is this decision that we're about to make as a management team and a board going to make our people and our customers proud? So metaphorically, those 2 seats, in my mind, occupy the 2 most important constituents of the entire company. Now, the shareholders are represented by the board. They have a fiduciary responsibility, but I'm thinking about our people and our customers, and those 2 seats are a constant reminder to me that we've got to come out of this room making the right decision. And I should say, we have not always made the right decision. We're not perfect, and we've got lots of challenges, and we've tried to build a great company. People have very high expectations of us, and we don't always get it right. But I think the currency of success for us has been trying to build the currency of trust with every constituency, most importantly our people and our customers.
Tell us what happened. Just take us inside the room of what happened this spring when you heard about what happened in Philadelphia.
I was not expecting that question. But I think it's fine that we should talk about that. We are living at a time in America where every single day there are significant systemic problems, social problems, mental health issues, racial issues. The country's very divided politically. And if you think about 100 million people a week come through our stores, every day we're dealing with the systemic issues of the country. And we did not start our business to be a public bathroom or a place for people just to come, but we did create a third place, and we want to create community. So we had a flawed policy, and the policy was loose, and it was if you want to use the bathroom, we should expect somebody to be a customer. But if you want to use the bathroom, you're not a customer, the manager should use some discretion, and it should be the right decision, open the bathroom. In this particular case in Philadelphia, the manager, white woman from the Midwest, two gentlemen came in, African Americans, sat down and asked to use the bathroom. And she said, no. Are you a customer? Are you buying something? And they said, no, we're waiting for our friend. And in about a 2-minute, 3-minute period, a conversation developed, and it got a little bit heated, and she called 911. And the transcript was, she did not say the two gentlemen were African Americans, but she asked the police to come and remove the two gentlemen. And within 6 minutes, 6 police officers arrived and handcuffed the two gentlemen and arrested them. And thank God they did not resist. Now, when we got this call, I was embarrassed. It was reprehensible. We were ashamed, and we couldn't believe this could happen to us. How could this happen? The culture and values and character of the company is all about openness, diversity. We had to react very quickly and go to Philadelphia and deal with the problem. And the problem was that we were at blame. The manager was not at fault because the policy did not provide her with the proper guidelines. The company was at fault. But in the world we're living in today, a video was taken, and within, I'd say 20 minutes, it had 11 million views, and we were under siege. And we had to find out what happened. We had to talk to a lot of people. We had outrage in Philadelphia, and I would say we were culpable. And that resulted in us asking a very serious question. And that is, in the world we're living in, what is our responsibility as a company to try and elevate the national discussion, national discourse about race? And as a result of that, we said, we're going to use this as an opportunity. And so I decided we're going to close all our stores for a day, and we're going to create a curriculum with world-class people who could help us co-author the curriculum. And we're going to teach our people about unconscious bias and take them through a process where we become a better organization as a result of it. And we're going to open source the entire curriculum, and so it's online, everyone can see it. And we did that, and now we're committed to this kind of training once a month. But I think the issue that we are facing as a company is not dissimilar from an issue we're facing as a country. And that is, there is such inequality in the country, and we have to understand this. So let's put the political situation aside. We all know what's going on, but the facts are this. We're living in a country today where about 47% of American households, do not have $400 of cash for any kind of crisis. They are a health crisis away from being disrupted as a family. We have almost 6 million young people in America who are not in school, not in work, who are labeled as opportunity youth, mostly black and Hispanic. And so those are just two issues, not to mention the other things that are going on with regard to the division in America and the hate and the vitriol and the lack of respect and the lack of dignity. And I think we should all ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to live in? And aren't we better than this? And I think we're living at a time when there's such hate, and it's not something that I think is representative of the majority of Americans. And if you ask the majority of Americans, as an example, the majority of Americans want a solution on very important issues that, unfortunately, Washington has been unable to solve. Let's take immigration. 75% of Americans want a solution, a sensible solution to immigration, and we want security at the borders. That's just one issue, and if we had the right leadership, I think these problems could be solved, and where ideology would be put aside, and we would all be walking in the shoes of the American people. We would finally do what's necessary. But I think Starbucks is in every community in America, and we are dealing with lots of things that are not in our control, and we're just trying to respond to it as best we can, given the fact that there are systemic issues that are out of our control, that are based on our society today.
So here's the bigger question. Well, there's a lot of big questions embedded in all this, but and you can now you're in a position to say whatever you want as somebody who's well, you're still the executive, you're chairman.
I'm out of Starbucks.
Officially,
I'm out.
I thought there's still a month more.
No, well, we're going to open Milan on September 6th.
Okay. Because I know this is what the book is going to be about, and I know you've been thinking about this.
Yeah.
What do you think the role of CEOs today is supposed to be in the context of the political world? Every company is now getting wrapped up into all of these types of conversations. Certain CEOs are coming out and making very political statements one way or the other. By the way, you came out rather early. I'm thinking back in 2011, I think you were one of the first CEOs who had talked about boycotting donations for politicians on all sides.
Yes.
Just speak to the extent you've been thinking about this all summer and working on this book, that particular issue. Meaning, what is the role of a corporate leader today, and should they get involved in politics?
Well, I think it's a personal decision for the CEO and the board. And certainly if you are a consumer-based company like Starbucks, there's a cause and the effect, because you might be saying something or taking a position that could alienate a large portion of your customer base. So there's a lot of risk involved in that. I think the question has to be framed in a way that says, at least from my perspective, that the political class, both parties, I think have let the country down and have put us in a position where I think we all believe we are better than this. And any company, small or large, has employees in the company, and those employees have opinions. What do employees want? In addition to compensation, they want to work for a company that they believe in. They want to work for a company whose mission is values-based. They want to work for leaders they can trust. And in the world we're living in, where there's so much information and so much transparency about everything, and the news is now, I think it's incumbent upon the CEO to take a position that is representative of what you believe is in the best interest of the people who work for you. And so the question, I think, is at least framed for me, is what's the responsibility to your employees and the communities you serve? And then I think you got to ask yourself, when you look in the mirror, do you want to be a bystander, and what is the price of indifference? And I would say indifference in the environment that we are living in today, regardless of whether you are a private citizen or running a public company, I don't believe is the choice and the path that we should take. Now, I think you have to do these things through the lens of respect and dignity, and not fall into the trap of the vitriolic hate and the divisiveness that seems to be the way things are discussed every single day on cable TV. I think there's a way to do this that is much more respectful, much more aspirational, and gives people hope and opportunity that you're trying to speak to, in a sense, our better angels.
Okay, let me make it more complicated then. I'm going to go to Silicon Valley. I'm going to use Silicon Valley as our example for just a moment in this context. There's an argument, I think a fair argument to be made, that Silicon Valley was developed in large part by the Department of Defense and the U.S. government. And we are now at a moment right now where companies like Google and Facebook and others that worked with the government for a long time with the Department of Defense on all sorts of projects has decided, in large part because of their employees, that they don't want to do this anymore. And they don't want to be involved in it because they're unhappy about the politics of what's going on in Washington.
Right.
And there's a question about what the patriotic duty of a company is today, which is to say, do you do business effectively with the government? And does it matter whether you agree with who's in charge?
That's why he is Andrew Ross Sorkin.
We're going to make him answer the question. It's okay.
it's not an easy question to answer. So if you are a public company, you have been taught and imprinted that your primary responsibility as a fiduciary is to build shareholder value. I don't want to say that I don't agree with that, but I will say that I don't agree with it in totality. And I have been criticized over the years for making the statement and living by it that not every business decision is an economic one. So we live in a business environment that, especially as a public company, that is significantly short-term minded. And so every quarter, every day, the stock price becomes the proxy for how you're doing and whether or not you're going to have problems. So I can understand that if you are walking away from a government contract because you don't think it is in the interest of the values of the company, but it's going to be dilutive to your shareholders, you might have a big problem. So I think my answer is I want to take the long view. I want to do what's right in terms of my conscience and the fact that as a fiduciary of the company, that if I'm going to walk away from a contract, I have a very, very good reason for it that is in the long-term interest of the company. But I think these are very difficult questions to answer, and I think the question is relevant because we're living at a time where the rules of engagement for all of us as citizens, and certainly for any of us who are running a public company today, are very, very challenging, very difficult, and very fragile. And we have a long history of Starbucks of having town hall meetings, and we've done this for 30 plus years, where the entire company, every quarter, we're standing in front of the entire company. Andrew has seen a couple of these, and the person in front of the group is talking basically without a net. We're introducing subjects, we're having a dialogue about it, and people are challenged to tell us what you think. We want to be better. And I think the openness of those kind of conversations gives the CEO an opportunity to understand how to make these kinds of decisions. But the short answer is these are very difficult decisions given the environment we're living in, and I think given the retribution that could come from the political environment and the leadership that currently exists. So people are afraid, and boards are afraid, but there is a cause and the effect to whatever decision you might make. But I do go back to making your customers and your people proud of the decisions you're going to make over the long term, I believe, is in the interest of the shareholder. But it's hard to fight the short-term mentality and the immediacy of criticism and how the web can overnight turn truth into fiction, and then all of a sudden you've got a real problem.
Talking about the short term and the long term, I don't know if everybody saw earlier this morning, our president tweeted out, it was actually a very interesting tweet, said that he was going to advise the SEC to consider revising the idea of quarterly earnings reports, that companies would only report twice a year on a 6-month basis. Said he got the idea from Indra Nooyi of PepsiCo, who had just seen him in Bedford, I guess, earlier this week. I should tell you, it's the only time I think President Trump and Hillary Clinton have ever agreed. Hillary actually said a very similar thing just 3 years ago. What do you think of the idea of a company reporting only twice a year? Does that make sense to you?
I think the proposition makes sense to me. I would go a different way. I would say that if you are only reporting twice a year, I think there's a potential for bad actors to show up that could take advantage of that situation. What I'd rather see, as someone who's run a public company now for almost 30 years, is not providing quarterly guidance to the street. And for those of you who are not familiar with what that is when we are basically giving guidance to the street many quarters before we are in the quarter. And that guidance is what the street is expecting. And God forbid you miss the guidance, the stock is going to get killed and you're going to be embarrassed. And it's very difficult on a planning cycle to give quarterly guidance many quarters in advance. I think we'd be much healthier as a business community if there wasn't quarterly guidance. But I wouldn't say, just off the cuff, I would not be a big fan. I don't think that's going to create the transparency that I think we need. It might make a good soundbite, but I don't see it.
Let me ask you a different question. When I started this conversation, I mentioned that Starbucks has 3,500 stores in China.
Yeah.
More than one new store a day. There's obviously a huge conversation going on globally around whether there's going to be a trade war with China. But you are one of the few companies that managed somehow to create this business in China without a partner. Historically, a U.S. company wanted to do business in China, effectively had to do business with the Chinese government, or a Chinese company that was effectively often owned by the government. What did you do? How did that happen?
Well, we did have a partner when we started. We felt we needed that, and over time we realized that we would be better off if we controlled our own destiny in China. It should be mentioned that we lost money in China for 9 consecutive years, and I was under tremendous criticism and pressure from some people inside the company who were very cynical about the money we were losing, the investment we were making, and certainly the street gave us no credibility because we didn't have anything to show for 9 years. So the short version of this is we had to get the right management team. We had 2 consecutive American teams go to China. We made the first mistake, and then we made the same mistake again because we're not smart. And not that they were bad people, great people, but the fact is we thought we needed to transport the Starbucks culture to China. Once we had a Chinese team in place, and it turns out a Chinese woman CEO who's extraordinary, named Belinda Wang, who has created the company in China, we were on our way. But the turning point of this is another interesting story, is Jack Ma and I've been friends with Jack for many years. I knew Jack before he was Jack. In fact, Andrew came to the opening of a big store in China and interviewed Jack and I, and Jack invited me maybe 15 years ago to come give a speech at Alibaba. And so I did it. And I'm giving a speech, and I'm looking out in the audience, and it looked like there's a lot of old people. And so I said to him, what's the age of your employees? And he said, about 25. And I said, well, who are the people in the audience? And he said, it's their parents. And I said, what? What do you mean, the parents? He said, we have meetings with the parents of our employees. So I took that and stole that idea. And I said, Jack, you got to explain this to me. And so we have an annual meeting of the parents of our employees in China once a year. Now, I went back to Seattle, and I was so enthusiastic. I saw a great thing. We're going to have a big meeting with the parents of our employees. And the U.S. employees said, what are you talking about? So can you imagine if we had a meeting of the parents of our employees in Manhattan, how many parents might show up? I don't know. I would suspect not as many as we had in China. No, I'm not going to say anything disparaging. I know this is being broadcast. I just probably made a mistake. But in any event, the people in Seattle said, I don't think you need a big room for that. I said, well, I think we do. So we got a really big auditorium, and I think the people in Seattle were betting against me. They thought this was going to be just a nutty thing, this fool's errand. Anyway, we opened the doors, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. It was like, holy, what is going on here? And what I learned from Jack was we didn't talk about the company. We celebrated the family. We celebrated their kids. And we spoke to the parents about, we are here to take care of your kids, to teach them, to do everything we can to mentor them. And that was the beginning of a major turning point of how we were doing. And the government, 2 or 3 years later, asked to see me. This is another story that's, I got very nervous because, what did we do wrong? And, if you get summoned by someone in China, anything can happen, So I went there, and they wanted to hear how we were succeeding in China as an American company because overnight Starbucks had begun to get the traction. And the main reason was the values of Starbucks were translated into China, and there was no difference in terms of the respect we had from the customers and our people. It was exactly the same. And then We gave ownership to every Chinese employee, health care to their parents, and housing allowance because they travel long distances. And then that just changed everything. And what we did is basically replicate in a different way the benefits of Starbucks to the Chinese employee.
What,
Very warm.
you spent a lot of time in China. I know it's hot up here. What do you think the Chinese think of what's going on in the U.S. here right now? We're talking about politics and what's happening and how they think about this.
I think, Andrew, it would be better if we don't go there. I mean, I don't want to really get into politics and what the Chinese think. I don't know what they're thinking. I think they're probably a bit confused and concerned at the same time about the unpredictability. And I will say this: traveling to China as often as I have over the last 20 years, it's in China and U.S. interest for the two countries to not only get along, but to not be adversaries, but figure out a way that there's a lot of things we can do together that could help the citizens of both countries. And most importantly, it's in the interest of the world, and certainly the situation in North Korea, that the Chinese government, the American government, find ways to co-author and ways to cooperate, despite our differences. And I think that gets into leadership. And one thing Andrew knows that I'm concerned about and I write about is what is the role of a leader today, and what does it mean to be a servant leader? And I think we're lacking that. Certainly, if we just look out in the world today and ask yourself, who can you look at that's a real servant leader? And I was giving a talk one day, and someone said, well, who would you point out as a servant leader that you look at and respect? And I was thinking about this, and I said, it's not something that I've thought a great deal about, and I'm going to answer this in a different way that you're not expecting. I said, as a Jewish person, the servant leader that I think is representative, emblematic of what we need today is the Pope. And I mean that. I mean, when you see a man wearing the cloth, kneeling down and cleaning the feet of a peasant, and talking the way he speaks, he is a servant leader. And I think.
Final question for me, and then we'll open it up so everyone can get a shot on goal. Starbucks has represented in many ways, and this goes to the idea of, I think, your thoughts about what's happening in this country, but you've been traveling around the world, and Starbucks to many people is Americana. It is America. It's a brand that represents the country. You were telling me a story about a recent trip to Normandy.
Right.
And I thought we could leave our conversation there and then open it up, because to me, that story represents a lot about what's going on right now.
Well, thank you for asking me that. So I have been traveling a great deal around the country and around the world in the last 6 months or so. And Sherry and I have been doing it together. And I had never been to Normandy, and a place I've always wanted to go for a whole host of reasons. And we went to Normandy. And for those of you, I'm sure many, can I just see a set of hands? How many people have been to Normandy? So I think everyone who's been knows exactly the emotion, the feeling of respect, and at the same time, the humility, but the valor, the bravery, the sacrifice. In any event, we were leaving Normandy, and two things happened. I'll try and be very quick. We were leaving Normandy. We spent the entire day, and as we're leaving, a car pulls up right next to Sherry and I get out of the car. I just wanted to talk to him, and it turns out to be an American couple from Baltimore, Maryland, and she was a nurse and he was a lawyer. And I said, "What brought you here today?" And she didn't miss a beat. Like this, as soon as I asked the question, she said, "We wanted to be reminded of who we once were." And I felt like it was a spear in my heart when I heard that. But about 15 minutes before that, something else happened. And this is how I'd like to end before we open up to you. We were walking around the cemetery, and we're with a small group of people, and we kind of split up, and we're just walking around and looking at the headstones, and about 200 yards, 100 to 200 yards away, I could see somebody doing something. I didn't know exactly what it was, and I started walking towards him, and finally I get very close, and maybe 10 yards away, and he's on his knees, and he's wearing the uniform of the cemetery. He's working, but what's he doing? And as I got really close, he's on his knees with a scrub brush, and he is scrubbing the headstone one by one across the entire cemetery. And I was so moved by that I kneeled down. I said, "Thank you." And he didn't speak any English, but he stood up and he said, "No, thank you." And that to me was a moment where I was reminded of who we are, that we have such a moral obligation to reaffirm the promise of the country. We have such a moral obligation to restore the promise for so many people who have sacrificed so much to give us the gift of America. And I don't want to see us in decline. And I don't want to see so many millions of people being left behind. And I know we can do better, and I know we can come together.
Howard Schultz. Thank you. I know we have
Thank you.
a number of questions, and I see firsthand all the way in the back, so we'll go to you.
I agree with you, Howard, that the level of political discourse should be raised. And so this will be the last time I say in public that I think the President of the United States is an ignoble and moral lying lowlife. But he has fashioned a weapon that is as strong as Siegfried's sword. That is to say, he has turned the truth into fiction, and he has half the country believing. Question. And he has half the country believing that fiction.
Right. So,
And I wonder how you would advise a candidate in 2020 how to transcend that weapon and get the truth to the American public.
I'm respectful of the question and certainly the concerns you have. I'm not a political candidate for 2020. I'm just here trying to share my thoughts and concerns. I will say I think the American people are longing for truth and longing for the kind of leadership that they can embrace. And I think the majority of the country, not the extremists on both sides, and we have extremists on both sides, that there is an opportunity, I think, for someone to emerge that speaks to the conscience of the country. And I think we're all somewhat exhausted, literally exhausted, from the episodic issues of every day and the deluge of it. And I think we saw something yesterday that I thought was extraordinary, that Admiral McCraven, who I know very, very well, an extraordinary American hero who served almost 40 years as an admiral in the Navy and the head of the Navy SEALs and was the commander of the bin Laden situation. And he came out yesterday and I thought did it in a way that really was honorable. And I think I would answer the question through the lens of honor. I don't have much to say beyond that.
ma'am.
Yes, I'm very curious to know, now that you've stepped away from the organization, the future and the culture that you have developed, your legacy will go forward in terms of Starbucks.
Well, I certainly hope it will. I was planning on leaving for 2 years, and the succession was done in a way that I think was orchestrated very well with somebody who's very skillful and has different qualities than me. But the culture and the values of Starbucks have been deeply imprinted into the organization. And it has a long memory, like a young child. And I think I'm very confident that the companies are going to continue to do well. And even though I'm outside of the company, they know that I'm there to help and advise. And I'm still very close and will be close to the people who are kind of running the show. And I've got great confidence that Starbucks is going to continue to succeed at a very high level.
By the way, how hard is it for you emotionally? I was there, I should tell you, when I was covering this, the day that he stepped down. And I will tell you, it was remarkable watching. You've never seen people, employees cry. I mean, the place was tears, waterworks. I haven't actually I don't know if I've seen you since then. So just on a day, I'm curious selfishly, on a day-to-day basis, how much do you think about it now?
I go into the store in East Hampton and the line is kind of long. Bothers me a bit. But I'm trying to wean myself off of it. And so the big thing that I've changed, just like in the last few days, is my whole life has been based on 5 a.m. getting the numbers of everything that happened around the world. And that would be the kind of the blueprint of how I would conduct my day based on what happened. And I was still getting the numbers in the last month and a half. It was kind of driving me crazy. And so I said, you know what? I want you to stop sending me the numbers. So I still wake up, but there's nothing there. And I will confess that over the last few days, I've made a couple of phone calls just to get a sense of how things are going. So it's hard. It's my I've spent more than half my life at Starbucks, and I love the company, and it's not an easy transition.
Right. Why don't we go over here, sir, and then ma'am?
Yeah. So, Andrew, on a personal note, I think of you as starting the morning with my coffee and Cornell alumni events.
Go Big Red.
I think about you as being part of the East Hampton Library scene. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question, because you articulated before that the Philadelphia situation went viral. 11 million people knew about it in about 22 seconds.
Yeah.
Marriott had a problem with the Chinese government because on a drop-down, they referred to Taiwan as an independent country. How do you deal as a corporate leader with the inadvertent dangers of social media and the internet?
I made a comment earlier by saying that the rules of engagement have changed dramatically when Andrew asked me the question of what do you do about government contracts. I would say over the last decade, regardless of any business that you're in, small or large, any product, any enterprise, you have to be a tech company. You have to be. And with regard to if you are a consumer-based product in which you're dealing with the public, that means that you have to have an offensive and a defensive presence that protects you and also gives you the tools and the resources to ensure the fact that when you are being attacked, wrongfully or rightfully, that you have the tools and the resources, which means that the capital investment for either building a company or keeping a company alive today is very different than it was even a decade ago, because you have a new channel that you must be best in class in that you didn't even have to consider 10 years ago as a vehicle for investment. And one could make the case that that investment is tied to your long-term success. And any company today that falls too far behind, and the way to think about this is you must invest ahead of the growth curve. And if you fall too far behind, you will not catch it, because technology is moving so fast anyway that you have to keep reinvesting with regard to the foundation, the platform that you already have. And the other thing I'd say is you've got to get younger in the company. And I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, this is serious stuff, is that if you're 30 years old and you're running these people are 30 years old in that particular business, those people are too old. You need digital natives that are in their 20s. And we brought a person on our board 5 years ago. We brought two people on at the same time. Secretary Gates, head of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, on our board in his 70s, and a 29-year-old person, Chinese American from Silicon Valley. And the two of them entered the boardroom together for the first time. And I think people were like saying, how is this going to work? But we needed both of them, and we needed her in the boardroom.
Ma'am, you had a question right there.
From an environmental standpoint, you have decided not to use plastic straws anymore. Do you think you can influence other companies to be more environmentally sound, and what do we do about water bottles?
Yeah. We have, over the years, tried to do so many things in so many areas with regard to sustainability, the environment. But the short answer to your question is not the power of Starbucks, but the power of the consumer. The consumer today can really dictate to a company about whether or not they're going to support that company based on their values and their practices. We have seen other companies follow us into the straw issue. We've been trying to solve the paper cup problem for a decade. Very difficult to do it because we can't get the paper companies to invest with us. They have embedded capital in that manufacturing equipment and things of that nature. So these problems are very complicated, and there's a lot of legacy issues that we're trying to deal with. With regard to the bottles, I think people much smarter than me can try and figure that out. But I understand the question, and I'm very respectful of it.
And a quick follow. Have you found a paper company that makes a paper straw that's even half as good as a plastic straw?
We have not.
Doesn't get soggy.
No, we have not. We have such an opportunity to help a company be in business, and it's something we're probably going to end up having to do ourselves.
Interesting. Why don't we go all the way back there?
I know that you put a sign at Starbucks saying to leave the guns outside.
Guns?
Guns outside.
How do you suggest that we in Starbucks, how do you suggest that you're going to protect from somebody, a terrorist with a gun, coming in, besides telling maybe your workers to tell him that the 70 girls are not virgins anymore?
Okay.
Because there were a lot of terrorists coming.
But the question is about guns at Starbucks. Okay. This is believe it or not, this is a very serious question on a number of issues, primarily because 46 out of 50 states have legislated a law called open carry. I don't know how many of you are aware of that law, but what it states is that in 46 out of 50 states, you have the right to carry a gun on your person. And that gun can be loaded. And as a result of that, you can walk into public spaces with the gun. 46 out of 50 states in America today. This goes back to what I said earlier. Starbucks is a public place. So we have had incidents where people have walked into our stores with guns. Now, Starbucks is not a company that is in any way against the Second Amendment. And I am not against the Second Amendment. All we want to suggest is that I don't think our customers are comfortable with a gun. And so we've asked people respectfully to leave your gun outside of Starbucks. And we haven't had any problems. Just trying to be respectful and do it in a way that does not create tension or incite anyone to do something that would be inconsistent with what a public place should be. But the law allows people in 46 states to do that.
Sir.
Hi, I'm a junior studying in China. I'm studying finance and accounting, and I was wondering if you can offer some advice for someone who's about to join the job market. And second, can I send you my resume?
Well, I think anyone studying Mandarin today is obviously going to have a strategic advantage in the job market. I'm sure many people perhaps are not aware of something that the Chinese are doing right now that I think is instructive with regard to American foreign policy. So China is investing trillions, not billions, but trillions of dollars in what they're calling One Road. And basically, it is an opportunity for China to convene and collect partnerships with almost 70 countries throughout the Pacific Rim and China and beyond to create a supercharged infrastructure for the Chinese government to create trade opportunities in all of these countries. And China is taking the long-term approach, decades of investment, to basically create the opportunity. And I'm not saying that this is what they will achieve, but their mindset is that investment will in turn create the opportunity for them to be the number one superpower in the world as a result of trade. And there's the lesson, I think, or what's instructive is the long-term approach that they are taking as a result of opportunities that perhaps America is not taking, and as a result of that trying to fill the void in terms of trade. So the short answer to your question, I think the road that you're going down in studying Chinese and understanding Mandarin and understanding the culture will be a real benefit to you. And I think in terms of Starbucks, our strategic growth plan is all about the growth and development of China. That's our number one growth vehicle, and I'll tell you who to send that to when we finish.
Why don't we try to sneak two more in?
Yeah, okay.
How about that? And
Yeah.
then we'll, because I know people, ma'am.
So, your story is wonderful. There are now an increasing number of wonderful stories about social venture and socially responsible companies. Could you speak to us a little bit more broadly about what is happening with leaders who are following examples like yours?
I go back to what I said earlier about the consumer. The social media and the web has created unbelievable transparency for the consumer to know everything possible about a company, about its values, about its practices, as well as the employees. So that puts a lot of pressure on companies to do the right thing. In addition to that, I think there are hundreds of altruistic leaders who are trying to do the right thing and recognize that doing the right thing is good business. And I don't think you can build a great enduring company today by turning your back on the character and the morality and the values of what's important to society and what's important to your people and what's important to the customer. So I'm very optimistic that you're going to see many, many companies emerge and do things that might surprise all of us in terms of their values and their contribution. But I feel very strongly you can't build a great enduring company unless you're going to advance the cause of making your people and your customers proud.
Why don't we take one more question? Sir, right there.
Since you're so consumer-oriented, is there a possibility in the near future of giving customers an option to buy certified organic coffee?
Organic coffee, these are one of these questions where I've been in the coffee business now for most of my life. I know a lot about it. The issue of organic coffee with regard to how it's labeled and what it really is something that perhaps is more myth sometimes than truth. I'd be happy to show you that, and I know someone at Starbucks can really demonstrate the difference between what the public is being influenced as to what is organic and what is not. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that another time. So, yeah.
But with your expertise and years in the business, couldn't you find out what's truly organic?
Yeah, and we have. And we have a strong point of view about what organic coffee really is.
Okay, I'm going to throw one more. We're going to throw one more question out there, ma'am. Go ahead.
You alluded to stakeholders in your presentation.
Yes.
In addition to shareholders, and I wondered if you would answer a question about the growing discrepancy with the romantic view of the CEO, who's responsible for everything, between the salaries of the CEOs and the workers.
Yeah.
Growing disparity.
Sure. very, very important question. I'm of the belief that management compensation should be tied to performance, and management compensation should be tied to a number of metrics within that performance, and shareholder value has to be at the top of that list, along with the morality of the company, the character of the company, and what we do for our employees. I think, and we can get into a lot of different subjects with regard to compensation. What we at Starbucks have tried to do is view compensation holistically. So cash compensation, equity in the form of stock options, health insurance, 401k, free college tuition, and look at all these things and say, in addition to the cash, these are the things that we think are important. And I think over time, what probably will happen is that we'll end up having an a la carte situation where people can choose, do they want more cash, less stock, do they want the kind of health insurance that we're providing, do they want free college tuition for their kids, because we can't do everything. Now, the board of a public company today has a strong fiduciary responsibility to not only pay the CEO, but to create an enduring management team that is in place, and the disparity between what somebody makes should be performance-based, and there should be no sense of entitlement whatsoever. And I think this is an area of, this is one of these areas that produces tension among people. Someone might think you're getting paid too much, and someone's not getting paid enough, and certainly there's going to be a great debate about what the minimum wage should be. So these are complex problems, and not an easy answer with regard to your question. But I think having empathy and having compassion and understanding that a great company can't succeed if we're not sharing success, and we got to find that fragile balance between compensation for everybody and shareholder value. And being a public company today is not an easy thing when there's such a pressure and a short-term mentality from the shareholder.
Howard Schultz, everybody. Thank you.